Before we begin this incredible true story, let us know where you're from in the comments below. If you enjoy stories about love, fate, and second chances, please like and subscribe. Have a beautiful day, everyone. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Sterling Medical Center as Natalie Foster sat nervously in the waiting room. At 24, she had her whole life planned out. She would finish her degree in fine arts, open a small gallery in the city, maybe travel to Paris to study the masters. Everything felt possible, everything felt within reach. The medical center was unlike anything Natalie had experienced before. Everything gleamed with expensive sophistication. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel rather than a doctor's office. Her best friend Rebecca had insisted she come here for a checkup, pulling strings through her boss to get Natalie an appointment at this exclusive clinic. Natalie smoothed down her simple cotton dress, feeling out of place among the wealthy clients who frequented this establishment. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes reflected both hope and uncertainty. She clutched her worn leather bag, a gift from her grandmother, as if it could anchor her to her familiar world. The mistake that changed. 2 lives, a nurse with kind eyes and graying hair called her name. Natalie followed her down a pristine hallway lined with awards and certificates. The examination room was spacious and modern, decorated in calming shades of cream and soft blue. Dr. Patricia Morgan entered with confident strides. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp features and an air of authority that came from years of success in her field. She reviewed Natalie's file with quick efficiency, barely making eye contact as she prepared for the routine examination. What neither of them knew was that in the laboratory next door, a catastrophic error was unfolding. A tired technician, working his 3rd consecutive double shift, had mislabeled 2 samples. One was standard solution for routine examinations. The other was a carefully preserved genetic sample belonging to one of their most prestigious clients, Julian Westbrook. A billionaire who had stored his material after a devastating diagnosis threatened his ability to have children. The examination proceeded with clinical efficiency. Dr. Morgan, distracted by thoughts of an upcoming conference and her daughter's wedding preparations, administered what she believed was routine treatment. Natalie felt a brief moment of discomfort, squeezed her eyes shut, and within minutes it was over. She left the clinic with informational pamphlets about wellness and nutrition, completely unaware that her life had just been irrevocably altered. The discovery 5 weeks passed, like pages turning in a book Natalie didn't know she was reading. She threw herself into her senior art project, spending long hours in the university studio. She loved the smell of oil paints and turpentine, the way colors could blend and transform on canvas, creating something beautiful from nothing. But something felt different. Her body was changing in subtle ways. There was a persistent nausea that greeted her every morning, a heaviness in her chest, and a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. At first, she blamed stress. Final exams were approaching, and she had 3 major pieces to complete for her portfolio. Rebecca noticed first. They were having lunch at their favorite campus cafe when her friend put down her sandwich and studied Natalie with concern. "You look pale, really pale. When was your last period?" The question hit Natalie like ice water. Her mind raced backward, counting weeks, then counting again. Her face must have revealed her realization because Rebecca reached across the table and gripped her hand tightly. "Nat, is there any chance you could be pregnant?" "No." The word came out firm but trembling. "That's impossible. I've never been with anyone. You know that?" But the seed of doubt had been planted. The next morning, alone in the tiny bathroom she shared with Rebecca, Natalie took 3 pregnancy tests with shaking hands. She watched in growing horror as each one displayed the same impossible result. Positive. The word echoed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. How could this be happening? She was a virgin. She had never been intimate with anyone. The only medical procedure she'd had was that routine checkup at Sterling Medical Center. A family torn apart, telling her parents was the hardest thing Natalie had ever done. She came from a close family with traditional values. Her father, Robert, worked as a high school teacher, and her mother, Catherine, volunteered at their local church. They had always been proud of their daughter, their first child, to attend university. Natalie sat in their modest living room, surrounded by family photos and her mother's handmade quilts. The familiar smell of her mother's baking usually brought comfort. Now it made her stomach turn. "I need to tell you something." Her voice broke before she could continue. The silence after she spoke was devastating. Her father's face turned red, then pale. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor with a sound that made Natalie flinch. "Get out!" His voice was quiet at first, controlled. Then it rose to a roar. "Get out of my house!" "Robert, please." Her mother's voice was weak, uncertain. "She's lying, or she's been lying to us all along. I raised you better than this." His hands trembled with rage and hurt. "I worked extra jobs to send you to that university. I believed in you. And this is how you repay us? I didn't do anything wrong." Natalie sobbed, standing on shaking legs. "I don't know how this happened. I swear on everything I hold sacred, I've never been with anyone." Her father's response was to sweep his arm across the mantel, sending family photographs crashing to the floor. Glass shattered, and Natalie saw her own smiling face from happier times staring up at her from the wreckage. "I want you gone by tonight. You are no longer my daughter." Her mother sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't defend Natalie. She didn't stand up to her husband. She simply sat there, clutching her rosary beads, her lips moving in silent prayer. A new beginning. That night, Natalie packed everything she could fit into 2 suitcases. Rebecca picked her up without hesitation, loading the bags into her beat-up Honda and driving Natalie to her small apartment across town. "You can stay as long as you need." Rebecca hugged her tightly. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." Days turned into weeks. Natalie struggled to focus on her classes while dealing with morning sickness and the emotional weight of her family's rejection. She was running out of money fast, unable to afford proper prenatal care without her parents' insurance. That's when fate intervened again. Rebecca came home one evening with unusual excitement in her eyes. "My boss mentioned something today. His company does business with Westbrook Technologies. Julian Westbrook is looking for a photographer for an upcoming charity gala. The pay is incredible, and I told my boss about your work. He wants to see your portfolio." Natalie felt her heart skip. Julian Westbrook. Even she had heard of him. The brilliant tech entrepreneur who had built an empire before turning 35. The man whose face graced magazine covers and business journals. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big." "You're more than ready." Rebecca squeezed her hand. This could change everything. 3 days later, Natalie found herself standing in the gleaming lobby of Westbrook Technologies, clutching her portfolio and trying not to feel overwhelmed by the opulence around her. Everything was glass and chrome, modern and expensive. She wore her best dress, a simple black number that hid her small but growing belly, and had pulled her hair back in a professional bun. A polished assistant led her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Mr. Westbrook will be with you shortly." When the door opened and Julian Westbrook walked in, Natalie forgot how to breathe. He wasn't what she expected. Yes, he was handsome with dark hair and striking blue eyes, but there was something else. A sadness in his expression, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried alone. He wore an expensive suit, but his tie was loosened, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights. "Miss Foster." His voice was deep and warm, despite the exhaustion she could hear beneath it. "Thank you for coming." When their hands touched in greeting, Natalie felt something electric pass between them. A spark of recognition that made no logical sense. His hand was warm and strong, and he held hers a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Neither of them knew that this moment was not their true beginning. Neither of them realized that biology and fate had already bound them together months ago in a sterile laboratory, through an era that would change both their lives forever. As Julian gestured for her to sit and began discussing the charity gala, Natalie felt the baby flutter inside her for the first time. A small movement, barely noticeable but undeniable. And in that moment, sitting across from a man she had just met, but somehow felt she had known forever, Natalie understood that nothing in her life would ever be simple again. The meeting with Julian Westbrook lasted 2 hours, though it felt like minutes to Natalie. They discussed the charity gala, a massive event supporting children's education programs, but their conversation kept drifting to deeper topics. He asked about her art, really asked, leaning forward with genuine interest as she explained her love for capturing raw human emotion through photography. These images. Julian studied her portfolio with careful attention, his fingers tracing the edge of a black and white photograph showing an elderly woman laughing with her grandchildren. You don't just take pictures, you capture souls. Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. That's exactly what I try to do. Anyone can point and click, but to really see someone, to capture who they are beneath the surface, that takes connection. Julian looked up at her, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding that felt too profound for two strangers. You understand that most people spend their whole lives being photographed but never truly seen, and you feel unseen. The words left Natalie's mouth before she could stop them. She felt her face flush. I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. No. Julian's voice was soft. You're right. The job is yours, Miss Foster, and I'd like to hire you for several other projects as well if you're interested. My company is expanding and we need someone who can capture the human element of what we do. As Natalie left the building that day with a contract worth more money than she had ever seen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just begun. Crossing professional lines, the weeks that followed blurred together in a strange and beautiful way. Natalie worked for Westbrook Technologies 3 days a week, photographing everything from executive portraits to community outreach programs. The money allowed her to afford a small studio apartment and proper medical care for her pregnancy, which was now entering the 5th month. She wore loose clothing and positioned her camera bag strategically to hide her growing belly. So far, no one had noticed, or if they had, they were too polite to mention it. But it was the evenings that changed everything. Julian began asking her to stay late, helping him prepare presentations for investors. The office would empty, the city lights would twinkle outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, growing up with a demanding father who valued success over happiness. Thomas Westbrook had built the family fortune through ruthless business practices, and he expected his son to be equally cutthroat. Julian had tried, building Westbrook Technologies into a billion-dollar empire, but the cost had been his soul. I look around at everything I've built. Julian stood at the window one night, his reflection ghostly in the glass. And I wonder who I built it for. My father wanted an empire. My wife wanted the lifestyle, but what did I want? Natalie stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. What do you want now? He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. To feel something real, to connect with someone who sees me, not my bank account or my last name. To matter to someone for who I am, not what I can provide. You matter to me. The words came out as a whisper, but they hung in the air between them like a confession. Julian raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step away, but Natalie didn't move. When his fingers touched her face, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were something precious he was afraid of breaking. You're so young. His voice was rough with emotion. And I have no right to feel what I'm feeling. I'm 24, not a child. Natalie opened her eyes to find him staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath. And you can't control feelings, they just exist. I'm married. The words came out like a confession, like a sin. I know. Natalie did know. She had Googled him after their first meeting, seen the society photos of him with his beautiful wife Lauren at various charity events. Lauren Westbrook, with her perfect blonde hair and designer clothes, smiling for cameras while her eyes remained cold and distant. It's been over for years. Julian's hand was still on her face, his thumb now tracing her cheekbone. We live separate lives under the same roof. She has her social circle and her lovers. I have my work and my loneliness. We're divorcing, but these things take time when lawyers and prenuptial agreements are involved. You don't owe me explanations. But even as Natalie said it, she realized how desperately she wanted to hear them, wanted to believe that what was growing between them was real and possible, not just a fantasy built on stolen moments. Julian leaned closer, and Natalie could feel his breath on her lips. I think I've been waiting for you my whole life. How is that possible when we just met? The first kiss. Their first kiss happened on a rainy Thursday night in late November. They had been working on a presentation for a new affordable housing initiative that Julian was passionate about. The office was dark, except for the glow of his computer screen and the city lights filtering through the rain-streaked windows. Natalie had gotten up to stretch, her back aching from sitting too long. She didn't mention that the ache was partly from her pregnancy, from the baby that seemed to grow heavier each day. She walked to the window, watching the rain create rivers, down the glass, blurring the world outside into abstract streaks of light and shadow. Julian came to stand behind her. She could see his reflection in the window, could feel the heat of his body just inches from hers. Natalie. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. She nodded, her heart suddenly racing. I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air, impossible and perfect. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know I have no right to feel this way, but every moment I spend with you makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. You see me? Not Julian Westbrook, the billionaire, or the tech genius, or the disappointing son. You see me, the person beneath all of that. And when you look at me, I remember who I wanted to be before the world told me who I had to become. Natalie turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. Julian, I know you probably don't feel the same way. You're young and talented, and you have your whole life ahead of you, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what's happening in my heart. You think I don't feel it too? Natalie reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. You think I don't lie awake at night thinking about you? You think I don't count the hours until I can see you again? Hope flickered in Julian's eyes, tentative and fragile. Natalie, I'm falling in love with you too. The confession felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating. And yes, it's fast and complicated and maybe completely insane, but it's real. What I feel when I'm with you is the most real thing I've ever experienced. Julian cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to be another man who makes promises he can't keep. Then don't make promises. Natalie rose on her toes, bringing her lips closer to his. Just be here with me now. Let's have this moment and not worry about tomorrow. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear. But then Julian pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against her lower back. And the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and recognition and desperate need. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the world outside the window ceased to exist, until there was nothing but the two of them and the electricity flowing between them. When they finally pulled apart, both trembling, Julian pressed his forehead against hers. This changes everything. I know. Natalie's hand was still on his chest, feeling his racing heart match the rhythm of her own. We should be careful. Take things slow. We should. But neither of them moved away. The secret grows. The days that followed were a blend of professional collaboration and stolen intimacy. During work hours, they maintained careful distance, speaking formally, avoiding prolonged eye contact. But after everyone left, when the office became their private world, They allowed themselves to exist in the space they had created together. They didn't sleep together. Julian was adamant about that boundary, insisting that Natalie deserved more than a hurried encounter in an office. But they kissed long and deep. They talked for hours, sharing secrets and dreams. They fell asleep on his office couch, tangled together, only to wake before dawn and part with lingering touches and reluctant goodbyes. Natalie's belly continued to grow. She was 6 months pregnant now, and hiding it was becoming increasingly difficult. She bought a larger camera bag, wore flowing shirts and structured blazers. She avoided sitting certain ways and learned to position herself so the bump was less obvious. Rebecca noticed, of course. Her best friend cornered her one evening in their shared apartment building. "Natalie, you need to tell him." Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. "You're falling in love with this man, and you're carrying a child. He deserves to know. How do I even begin that conversation?" Natalie sank onto the worn couch, placing both hands protectively over her belly. "Hey, Julian, I'm pregnant with a baby that shouldn't exist. Oh, and by the way, I have no idea who the father is because I was artificially inseminated by accident during a routine medical exam." "It sounds insane because it is insane." Rebecca sat beside her. "But keeping it secret is worse. What happens when you can't hide it anymore? What happens when he finds out you've been lying to him?" "I'm not lying. I'm just not telling him everything." "That's the same thing, and you know it." Natalie knew Rebecca was right. The guilt was eating at her from the inside. Every time Julian touched her, every time he whispered that he loved her, she felt the weight of her deception growing heavier. The truth begins to surface. It was Julian's father who forced the issue. Thomas Westbrook had heard rumors about his son spending excessive time with a young photographer. He didn't approve of anything that might complicate Julian's divorce proceedings or damage the family's reputation. One afternoon, Thomas showed up unannounced at Julian's office. Natalie was there, reviewing photographs from a recent company retreat. She heard raised voices through the thick office door. "You're being reckless, Julian." Thomas Westbrook's voice was cold and cutting. "Your divorce isn't finalized. Lauren could use this against you. There's nothing to use. Natalie works for me. That's all. Don't insult my intelligence. I have eyes everywhere. You're developing feelings for this girl, and it's going to cost you. Lauren's lawyers will paint you as an unfaithful husband having an affair with an employee young enough to be your daughter. Natalie is 24, not a child, and my marriage was over long before I met her. That's not how it will look in court. Think about what you're risking. Your reputation, your company's image, the divorce settlement. Is she worth all of that?" There was a pause, then Julian's voice came through clear and strong. "Yes, she is worth everything." Natalie's heart swelled with emotion, but it was quickly followed by crushing guilt. She was putting Julian at risk. Her presence in his life was complicating everything. And she hadn't even told him the biggest complication of all. That evening, after Thomas had left and the office had emptied, Julian found Natalie sitting in the dark conference room, staring out at the city lights. "You heard." It wasn't a question. I heard. Natalie didn't turn around. "Your father is right. I'm complicating your life." Julian sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "You're not a complication. You're the best thing that's happened to me in years. Julian, there's something I need to tell you." Natalie's voice shook. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Before she could continue, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "It's my lawyer. I have to take this." He stepped out of the room and Natalie heard fragments of the conversation. Something about Lauren demanding more in the settlement, threatening to go public with allegations, lawyers scheduling emergency meetings. When Julian returned, he looked exhausted. "I'm sorry. I have to go deal with this tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" Natalie nodded, swallowing the confession that had been on the tip of her tongue. "Of course. Go handle what you need to handle, but tomorrow never came." The next morning, Natalie received a call from her mother. Catherine's voice was strange, tight with emotion. "Natalie, I need you to meet me. It's about your medical situation. I've been doing some investigating, and I think I've found something." 2 hours later, Natalie sat in a small cafe across from her mother, listening to words that didn't make sense. "I contacted the fertility clinic. I demanded to speak with the director. At first, they stonewalled me, but I threatened legal action. Catherine's hands shook as she held her coffee cup. There was an error, Natalie. A terrible, catastrophic error. What kind of error? You were accidentally inseminated with a stored genetic sample. The technician mixed up the labels. The sample belonged to one of their clients. Catherine pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. It belonged to Julian Westbrook. The world stopped. Time seemed to freeze as Natalie stared at the documents in front of her. Medical records, lab reports, a name she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. Julian Westbrook. The man she loved was the biological father of her baby. The connection she had felt from the first moment they met wasn't just attraction or coincidence. It was biology. It was destiny twisted through medical error into something impossible and undeniable. Natalie? Her mother's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? But Natalie couldn't answer. She could only sit there, one hand pressed protectively over her belly where Julian's child grew, and try to understand how fate had woven their lives together in the most intimate way possible before they had even met. And somewhere across the city, Julian Westbrook sat in his lawyer's office fighting for his future, completely unaware that everything was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Natalie sat frozen in the cafe, the medical documents spread before her like evidence of an impossible crime. Her mother's voice became background noise as her mind raced through every interaction she'd had with Julian. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered confession of love. All of it had been built on a foundation she hadn't known existed. The baby inside her kicked, a strong flutter that made Natalie place her hand over her belly. Julian's child. Not some anonymous donor's genetic material, but his. The man she had fallen in love with was already connected to her in the most profound way possible. Natalie, we need to tell him. Catherine reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. He has a right to know. And you need to tell him before someone else does. How? Natalie's voice came out broken. How do I tell the man I love that I'm carrying his child because of a medical mistake? How do I explain that before we ever met? Fate had already bound us together. You tell him the truth. You show him these documents. Catherine squeezed her hand. And you pray that love is strong enough to survive this revelation. Natalie looked at her mother, really looked at her. Catherine had aged in the months since their confrontation. There were new lines around her eyes, gray streaks in her dark hair that hadn't been there before. But there was also something softer in her expression, something that looked like regret. Why are you helping me now? Natalie asked quietly. After everything that happened, after Dad threw me out, you stayed silent. Why stand up for me now? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Because I was wrong. Because I let fear and shame dictate my actions instead of love. Because you are my daughter. And I should have protected you when you needed me most. She paused, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. Your father and I have separated. He refused to see reason, refused to investigate what really happened. But I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I had to find the truth. Mom! Natalie felt her own tears falling. I'm scared. What if Julian thinks I knew? What if he believes I manipulated this somehow? Then he's not the man you think he is. Catherine stood, gathering the documents and placing them carefully in her purse. But from everything you've told me, from the way your eyes light up when you talk about him, I think he'll understand. Love doesn't always come in neat packages, Natalie. Sometimes it comes through chaos and mistakes and impossible circumstances. But that doesn't make it less real. Confronting the past that evening, Natalie stood outside the Sterling Medical Center with Rebecca by her side. The building looked the same as it had 7 months ago, still gleaming and prestigious, still projecting an image of perfection that hid the catastrophic errors happening within its walls. Are you sure you want to do this? Rebecca asked, squeezing Natalie's hand. We have the documents. We could just go straight to Julian. I need to hear it from them. Natalie's jaw was set with determination. I need to look Dr. Morgan in the eye and ask her how this happened. I need answers before I can give Julian any. They walked through the pristine lobby, past the expensive furniture and abstract art that had intimidated Natalie on her first visit. Now she saw it differently. Now it looked like a facade hiding negligence and incompetence. The receptionist tried to stop them, but Natalie pushed past, Rebecca trailing behind. They found Dr. Morgan's office on the third floor. Natalie didn't knock. She simply opened the door and walked in. Dr. Patricia Morgan looked up from her computer, surprise flashing across her face. "Miss Foster, you can't just burst in here. I have patience. You have a lawsuit." Natalie slammed the documents onto the desk. "You have a catastrophic medical error that you've been trying to hide for 7 months. And you have about 5 minutes to explain to me how you accidentally inseminated me with Julian Westbrook's genetic material during what was supposed to be a routine examination." The color drained from Dr. Morgan's face. She stood slowly, her hands shaking as she picked up the documents. "How did you get these?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that it happened. What matters is that you destroyed my life, tore apart my family, and created a situation that should be medically and legally impossible." Natalie's voice rose with each word. "I want answers. I want to know exactly what happened that day." Dr. Morgan sank into her chair, suddenly looking much older than her 55 years. "There was a mix-up in the laboratory. The technician was overworked, exhausted from consecutive shifts. Mr. Westbrook's sample was being prepared for a surrogate procedure the same day as your examination. The labels were similar, and in his exhaustion, the technician grabbed the wrong one." "And you didn't notice?" Rebecca's voice was sharp with accusation. "You didn't check before you injected her?" "I should have." Dr. Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. "I was distracted thinking about other things. I didn't follow protocol. By the time we realized what had happened, weeks had passed. We didn't know how to find you, and when we did, you were already pregnant. We panicked. We made the wrong choice by staying silent. You made a series of wrong choices." Natalie leaned forward, both hands on the desk. "And now I have to live with the consequences. Now I have to tell the man I love that he's going to be a father because of your incompetence. Does he know?" Dr. Morgan asked quietly. "Does Julian Westbrook know about the pregnancy?" "Not yet. But he's about to." Natalie gathered the documents. "And when your clinic gets sued for everything you're worth, remember this moment. Remember that your mistakes have real consequences for real people." The revelation, Natalie went straight from the medical center to Westbrook Technologies. It was almost 8 in the evening, but she knew Julian would still be there. He practically lived in his office, especially now with the divorce proceedings intensifying. The security guard recognized her and waved her through. She took the elevator to the 23rd floor, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The baby kicked as if sensing her anxiety, and Natalie placed a protective hand over her belly. Julian's office door was open. He was standing at the window, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his posture. "I don't care what Lauren wants." His voice was tight with frustration. "She can have the house in the Hamptons, the art collection, whatever she thinks will hurt me most. I just want this to be over." He listened for a moment, then continued. "No, David, I'm not negotiating anymore. Give her what she's asking for. I have more important things to focus on now." He ended the call and turned around, finally seeing Natalie standing in the doorway. His expression immediately softened, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. "Natalie." He crossed the room in quick strides, reaching for her hands. "I didn't expect you tonight. Is everything okay?" She looked up at him, memorizing every detail of his face. The blue eyes that looked at her with such tenderness, the strong jaw and the small scar on his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he was tired. She loved this man so completely that the thought of losing him made her physically ache. "We need to talk." Her voice shook despite her best efforts to stay calm. "There's something I should have told you weeks ago. Something that's going to change everything." Julian's smile faded, concern replacing it. "You're scaring me." "What's wrong?" Natalie pulled her hands from his and took a step back. She needed distance for this. She needed to see his face when she told him. Needed to read his genuine reaction without the distraction of his touch. 7 months ago, I went to the Sterling Medical Center for a routine examination. She spoke slowly, carefully, watching his face. "I was a virgin. I had never been intimate with anyone, but I left that clinic pregnant." Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. How is that possible?" "There was a mistake. A catastrophic error in their laboratory. Natalie pulled the documents from her bag with shaking hands. A technician mixed up two samples. One was standard solution for examinations. The other was a stored genetic sample belonging to one of their clients. She watched understanding begin to dawn in Julian's eyes. Watched the color drain from his face as the pieces started connecting. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. That's not possible. The sample belonged to you, Julian. Natalie held out the documents, tears streaming down her face. The baby I'm carrying is yours. We were connected months before we ever met. The attraction we felt, the connection, it wasn't just emotional. It was biological. Fate or chance or some cosmic joke bound us together in the most intimate way possible before we ever spoke a word to each other. Julian took the documents with hands that trembled violently. He scanned the pages, his eyes moving rapidly over medical terminology and lab reports and legal statements. She watched as shock gave way to disbelief, then to something she couldn't quite read. You're pregnant. His voice was hollow. With my child? Yes? For how long have you known? This was the question Natalie had been dreading. About the pregnancy? Since I was 5 weeks along. About you being the father? Since this afternoon. Julian looked up sharply. This afternoon? You just found out today? My mother investigated the medical center. They finally admitted what happened. Julian, I swear I had no idea before today. I thought it was just some anonymous mistake. I never imagined that it could be you. He was silent for a long moment, staring at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into a different truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? We've been spending time together for weeks. We've shared things. You let me fall in love with you, and you never mentioned that you were carrying a child. I was scared. Natalie's voice broke. I was terrified that if you knew, you'd see me differently. That you'd think I was trying to trap you or manipulate you. I come from nothing, Julian. You're a billionaire. Who would believe that I didn't orchestrate this somehow? I would have believed you. Julian set the documents down carefully on his desk. If you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning, I would have believed you. Would you? Natalie challenged. Really? If on that first day we met, I had said, hi, I'm Natalie, and I'm pregnant with a baby that shouldn't exist, you would have believed me. You would have given me a chance? Julian ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had come to recognize. I don't know. Maybe not, but we'll never know now, will we? Because you made that choice for both of us. I made the only choice I could to survive. Natalie's voice rose with emotion. I was kicked out by my family. I was sleeping on my best friend's couch. I was barely affording food, let alone prenatal care. When you offered me a job, I took it because I was desperate. And when I started falling in love with you, I was terrified because I knew this secret could destroy everything. The impossible choice. Julian walked to the window, his back to her again. The city lights stretched out below them. Thousands of lives being lived in ignorance of the drama unfolding in this office. I stored that sample 3 years ago. His voice was quiet, almost contemplative. I was diagnosed with a condition that threatened my fertility. The doctor said if I ever wanted biological children, I needed to preserve my genetic material before treatment. Lauren and I were already having problems, but I hoped maybe a child could fix things. I was naive. He turned back to face Natalie, and she saw tears in his eyes for the first time. After the treatment, the doctors told me my chances of natural conception were almost zero. Lauren was relieved. She never wanted children anyway. Said they would ruin her figure and interfere with her social calendar. That's when I knew our marriage was truly over, not because of the fights or the separate bedrooms, but because she was happy that I couldn't give her something I desperately wanted to give, Julian. Natalie took a step toward him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. I mourned the children I would never have. I mourned the family I would never create. I made peace with the idea that my legacy would be buildings and businesses, not flesh and blood. He laughed, but it was a sound without humor. And now you're telling me that through some impossible medical error, I'm going to be a father after all. That the child I thought I could never have exists. That she's been growing inside the woman I love for 7 months. She? Natalie's hand went to her belly. How did you know it's a girl? I don't know. I just felt it. Julian crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. "Can I?" Natalie nodded, unable to speak. Julian placed his hand gently on her belly, his large palm covering the swell where their daughter grew. As if responding to her father's touch, the baby kicked strongly. Julian's eyes went wide with wonder. "She's real." His voice was filled with awe. "Our daughter is real. She's real." Natalie covered his hand with hers. "Julian, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's complicated and messy and not at all how anyone would plan to start a family. But she's here. She's healthy. And in 3 months, she's going to be born, whether we're ready or not." Julian was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on her belly, feeling each movement of their child. When he finally spoke, his words were not what Natalie expected. "Marry me." Natalie's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me." Julian pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Not because of obligation or duty or what people will think. Marry me because I love you. Because I've loved you from the moment you walked into my office with your sad eyes and your beautiful soul. Because you see me in a way no one else ever has. Because our daughter deserves to be born into a family built on love, not medical accidents." "Julian, you're still married. Your divorce isn't finalized. And this is all happening so fast. I'll finalize the divorce tomorrow. I'll give Lauren everything she wants. Money means nothing compared to this, compared to you and our daughter." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know it's fast. I know it's unconventional. But nothing about us has been conventional from the start. We were connected by fate before we ever met. Maybe this is how it was always supposed to happen." "What about your father?" "Your company? The scandal this will cause? Let there be scandal." Julian's voice was fierce now, passionate. "Let my father be disappointed. Let the board members whisper. Let the society pages write whatever they want. None of that matters. You matter. Our daughter matters. This family we're creating matters." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. "You're not angry? You're not upset that I kept this from you? I wish you had told me sooner." "I wish you had trusted me." Julian wiped her tears with his thumbs. "But I understand why you didn't. And I'm not going to punish you for being scared. We've both made mistakes, Natalie. We've both kept secrets. But we have a chance now to start fresh, to build something real and honest and beautiful. Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, to all of it." Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, mindfully of the baby between them. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft kisses that tasted of tears and promises and new beginnings. "We're going to be a family," he whispered against her hair. "You, me, and our miracle daughter." What he did next shocked everyone. The news broke 3 days later. Julian Westbrook, billionaire tech entrepreneur, was leaving his wife of 8 years for a 24-year-old photographer who was pregnant with his child through a medical error. The story had everything the media loved: wealth, scandal, impossible circumstances, and a love story that defied logic. The headlines were brutal. "Billionaire's secret baby scandal. Medical error creates $1 million baby. Tech mogul leaves wife for employee. Half his age." Thomas Westbrook was furious. He stormed into Julian's office, face red with rage. "You're destroying everything I built. The family name, the company's reputation, your own legacy. For what? For some girl and a baby that shouldn't even exist?" Julian stood from his desk, his voice calm but firm. "That girl is the woman I love. That baby is my daughter. And if you can't accept them, then you have no place in my life. You're choosing them over your family. They are my family now." Julian walked to the door, opening it in clear dismissal. "And if you want to be part of it, you'll show them the respect they deserve. Otherwise, I suggest you leave." Thomas left, and Julian never looked back. Lauren Westbrook gave a tearful interview to a major magazine, painting herself as the victim of her husband's betrayal. But the truth came out quickly. Her own affairs, her cold treatment of Julian, her relief at his infertility. Public sympathy shifted when people learned the full story. But what shocked everyone most came 2 weeks later. Julian didn't just marry Natalie in a private ceremony. He held a press conference, standing beside his pregnant bride, and made an announcement. That left the business world stunned. "I'm establishing the Foster Westbrook Foundation with an initial endowment of $500 million. His hand held Natalie's tightly as cameras flashed. This foundation will provide support for young mothers who have been abandoned by their families. It will fund education, housing, medical care, and legal services. Because no woman should ever have to face pregnancy alone. No woman should ever be thrown away by the people who should love her most. He turned to look at Natalie, love clear in his eyes. My wife taught me that true strength isn't measured in bank accounts or business acquisitions. It's measured in resilience, in courage, in the ability to keep moving forward when the whole world tells you to give up. She survived abandonment and uncertainty with grace. Now we're going to make sure other women have the support she should have had from the beginning. The applause from the gathered reporters was genuine. This wasn't the scandal they expected. This was something else entirely. Natalie stepped up to the microphone, one hand on her pregnant belly. 3 months ago, I was sleeping on my best friend's couch, wondering how I would afford my next meal. Today, I'm standing here as proof that life can change in impossible ways. That love can come from the most unexpected places. That mistakes and errors and chaos can somehow transform into miracles. She looked at Julian, then back at the cameras. Our daughter is going to be born into a world that knows her story. She'll know that she came from a medical error, from an impossible circumstance, from two people who found each other despite every obstacle. And we're going to teach her that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. That family isn't always planned. That love is worth fighting for, no matter how complicated the path. 3 months later, Natalie gave birth to Emma Catherine Westbrook on a snowy February morning. She came into the world with a full head of dark hair and her father's blue eyes, crying loudly as if announcing her arrival to everyone who had doubted she should exist. Julian held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "Hello, miracle girl," he whispered, touching her tiny fingers with wonder. "You have no idea how long I've waited to meet you." In the hospital room, surrounded by flowers and balloons, Natalie watched her husband with their daughter and felt a completeness she never knew was possible. Rebecca was there, crying happy tears. Catherine was there, finally reconciled with her daughter and meeting her granddaughter. Even Thomas Westbrook appeared at the door, awkward and uncertain, but carrying a stuffed bear and something that looked like regret in his eyes. "May I?" he asked quietly, looking at his son. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Meet your granddaughter, Dad, Emma Catherine, named after the two strongest women I know." Thomas held the baby carefully, his hardened expression cracking as Emma gripped his finger with her tiny hand. "She's perfect," his voice broke. "Julian, I've been a fool. I let pride and reputation blind me to what actually matters. I'm sorry. For everything?" "We have time to work on it," Julian said, taking his daughter back. "If you're willing to try." The months that followed were not easy. There were still whispers and judgments. There were legal battles with the medical center that would stretch on for years. There were adjustments and sleepless nights and moments of doubt, but there was also joy. There were first smiles and tiny hands reaching for faces. There were nights when Julian would sing Emma to sleep while Natalie photographed them, capturing the pure love in every frame. There were mornings when they would wake up tangled together with their daughter between them and realize that this strange, impossible family was exactly what all three of them needed. On Emma's first birthday, they threw a small party at their home. Friends and family gathered to celebrate not just a child, but a miracle. A love story that began with medical error and ended with healing and hope. Julian stood to make a toast, holding his champagne glass high. "A year ago, I thought I knew what my life would look like. I thought I understood what mattered. But this little girl..." He looked down at Emma, who was covered in cake and grinning up at him. "This little girl and her incredible mother taught me that the best things in life are the ones you never plan. The ones that come from chaos and mistakes and saying yes to the impossible." He turned to Natalie, love shining in his eyes. "You became the mother of my child by accident. But what came next was no accident. Loving you, building this life with you, choosing you every single day is the most intentional thing I've ever done. You are my miracle. Emma is our miracle. And I would live through all the scandal and judgment 1,000 times over to have this moment right here." Natalie stood, Emma in her arms, and kissed her husband while their friends and family applauded. And in that moment, surrounded by love and acceptance, she realized that sometimes the best stories are the ones that shouldn't be possible. Sometimes, fate has a plan that makes no logical sense but perfect emotional sense. Sometimes medical errors create miracles. And sometimes, the most shocking thing a billionaire can do isn't throw money at a problem. It's choosing love over reputation, family over fortune, and the impossible over the expected. Emma Catherine Westbrook was born from a mistake. But she grew up surrounded by proof that mistakes can transform into miracles, that love can emerge from chaos, and that the best families are built not on perfect plans, but on choosing each other every single day, despite every obstacle, despite every judgment, despite every reason to walk away. And that is a legacy worth more than any fortune. The end.